start. Thank you so much for coming to my very first con reading. I am so pleased to see you all. I'm going to read from Waters of Versailles, which is my Tour.com novella that came out this June. And it is obviously still on the site. It's a long story, but it's a short novella. It's about 18,000 words. And it's also available as an ebook. And Ellen Datlow bought it from me last year, and it just absolutely blew my mind when I got that email from her. I couldn't even handle it. And very shortly after that, I got an email from Usman congratulating me, and that was the friend of our beginning of our friendship. So that was very lovely to me. I'm going to read portions of the first part. Basically, I'm going to set up the problem for you. Our hero's name is Sylvain. So this is the beginning of Waters of Versailles. Sylvain had just pulled up Annette's skirts when the drips started. The first one landed on her wig, displacing a puff of rose-pink powder. Sylvain ignored it and leaned Annette back on the sofa, her breath sharpened to gasps that blew more powder from her wig. Her thighs were cool and slightly damp. Perhaps her arousal wasn't feigned after all, Sylvain thought, and reapplied himself to nuzzling her throat. After 2 winters at Versailles, Sylvain was well acquainted with the general passion for powder. Every Quartier had bowls and bins of the stuff in every color and scent. In addition to the pink hair powder, Annette had golden powder on her face and lavender at her throat and cleavage. There would be more varieties lower down. He would investigate that in time. The second drip landed on the tip of her nose. Sylvain flicked it away with his tongue. Annette giggled. "Your pipes are weeping, monsieur." "It's nothing," he said, nipping at her throat. The drips were just condensation, an annoyance, but unavoidable when cold pipes hung above overheated rooms. The sofa squeaked as he leaned in with his full weight. It was a delicate fantasy of gilt and satin, hardly large enough for the two of them, and he was prepared to give it a beating. Annette moaned as he bore down on her. She was far more entertaining than he had expected, supple and slick. Her gasps were genuine now, there was no doubt, and she yanked at his shirt with surprising strength. A drip splashed on the back of his neck, and another a few moments later. He had Annette abandoned now, making little animal noises in the back of her throat as he dove into her. Another drip rolled off his wig, down his cheek, over his nose. He glanced overhead, and a battery of drips hit his cheek, each bigger than the last. This was a problem. The pipes above were part of a new run, supporting connections to the suites of 2 influential men and at least a dozen rich ones. His workmen had installed the pipes just after Christmas. Even if they had done a poor job, leaks were not possible. He had made sure of that. He gathered Annette in his arms and shoved her further down the sofa, leaving the drips to land on the upholstery instead of his head. He craned his neck, trying to get a view of the ceiling. Annette groaned in protest and clutched his hips. The drips fell from a joint quick as tears. Something was wrong in the cisterns. He would have to speak with Leblanc immediately. "Sylvain," Annette's voice was strained. It could wait. He had a reputation to maintain, and performing well here was as critical to his fortunes as all the water flowing through Versailles. He dove back into her, moving up to a galloping pace as drips pattered on his neck. He had been waiting months for this. He ought to have been losing himself in Annette's flounced and beribboned flesh, the rouged nipples peeking from her bodice, her flushed pout and helplessly bucking hips. But instead, his mind wandered the palace. Were there floods under every joint? Instead of dampening his performance, the growing distraction lengthened it. When he was finally done with her, Annette was completely disheveled, powder blotched, rouge smeared, wig askew, face flushed as a dairymaid's. Annette squeezed a lock of his wig and caressed his cheek with a water-slick palm. "You are undone, I think, monsieur." He stood and quickly ordered his clothes. The wig was wet, yes, even soaked. So was his collar and the back of his coat. A quick glance in a gilded mirror confirmed that he looked greasy as a peasant, as if he'd been toiling at harvest instead of concluding a long-planned and skillful seduction, a seduction that required a graceful exit, not a mad dash out the door to search the palace for floods. Annette was pleased. More than pleased, despite the mess he'd made of her. She looked like a cat cleaning cream off its whiskers as she dabbed at her neck with a powder puff, ignoring the drips pattering beside her. The soaked sofa leached dye onto the cream carpet. Annette dragged the toe of her silk slipper through the stained puddle. "If this is not the only drip, monsieur, you may have a problem or two." "It is possible," Sylvain agreed, dredging up a smile. He leaned in and kissed the tips of her fingers, one at a time, until she waved him away. He would have to clean up before searching for Leblanc, and he would look like a fool all the way up to his apartment. But at least the gossips listening at the door would have an enduring tale to tell. 2. Sylvain ducked out of the marble halls into the maze of service corridors and stairs. Pipes branched overhead like a leaden forest. Drips targeted him as he passed, but there were no standing puddles, not yet. The little fish could turn the palace into a fishbowl if she wanted, Sylvain thought, and a shudder ran through his gut. The rooftop reservoirs held thousands of gallons, and Bull and Bear added new reservoirs just as fast as the village blacksmiths could make them. All through the royal wing, anyone with a drop of blood in common with the king was claiming priority over his neighbor, and the 100 or so courtiers in the north wing, less noble, but no less rich and proud, were grinding their teeth with jealousy. Sylvain whipped off his soaked wig and let the drips rain down on his head one by one, steady as a ticking clock as he strode down the narrow corridor. He ducked into a stairwell, no pipes above there, and scrubbed his fingers through his wet hair as he peeked around the corner. The drips had stopped. Only a few spatters marked the walls and floorboards. The little fish was playing with him. It must be her idea of a joke. Well, Leblanc could take care of it. The old soldier loved playing nursemaid to the creature. Age and wine had leached all of the man out of him and left a sad husk of a wet nurse, good for nothing but nursery games. A maid squeezed past him on the stairs and squealed as her apron came away wet. She was closely followed by a tall valet. Sylvain moved aside for him. "You're delivering water personally now, Monsieur de Guicherin?" Sylvain gave the valet a black glare and ran up the stairs, 2 at a time. The servants of Versailles were used to seeing him lurking in the service corridors, making chalk marks on walls and ceilings. He was usually too engrossed in his plans to notice their comments, but now he'd have to put an end to it. The next servant to take a liberty with him would get a stiff rebuke and remember that he was an officer and a soldier who spent half the year prosecuting the king's claims on the battlefield. By the time Sylvain had swabbed himself dry and changed clothes, Bull and Bear were waiting for him. Their huge bulks strained his tiny parlor at the seams. "What is the little creature playing at?" Sylvain demanded. Bull twisted his cap in his huge hands, confused. Bear raised his finger to his nose and reached in with an exploratory wiggle. "Down in the cisterns," Sylvain spoke precisely. "The creature, the little fish, what is she doing?" "We was on the roof when you called, monsieur," said Bull, murdering the French with his raspy country vowels. "We been bending lead all day," said Bear. "Long lead." "The little fish was singing at dawn. I heard her through the pipes," Bull added, eager to please. It was no use demanding analysis from 2 men who were barely more human than the animals they were named for. Bull and Bear were good soldiers, steady, strong, and vicious, but cannon fire had blasted their wits out. "Where is Leblanc?" Bull shrugged his massive shoulders. "We don't see him, monsieur, not for days." "Go down to the cellars, find Leblanc, and bring him to me." The old soldier was probably curled around a cask in a carelessly unlocked cellar, celebrating his good luck by drinking himself into dust. But even dead drunk, Leblanc knew how to talk to the creature. Whatever the problem was, Leblanc would jolly the silly fish out of her mood. Just as an aside, Sylvain has a problem because Leblanc is dead. 3. Our well-beloved king is an extraordinary man, said Sylvain, but even a man of his parts can only use one throne at a time. The Grand Chamberlain fluffed his stole like a bantam cock and lowered his hairy eyebrows. The issue is not how the second throne will be used, but how quickly you will comply with the request. We require it today. Disappoint us at your peril. Sylvain suppressed a smile. If royalty could be measured by the number of thrones, he was king of Europe. He had at least 24 in a village warehouse, their finely painted porcelain and precious mahogany fittings wrapped in batting and hidden in unmarked crates. Their existence was a secret even Bull and Bear kept close. To everyone else, they were precious, rare treasures that just might be found for the right person at the right price. The Grand Chamberlain paced the silk carpet. He was young, and though high-born, titled, and raised to the highest office, responsibility didn't sit well with him. He might have seen a battlefield or two in the distance, but had never known real danger. Those hairy brows were actually trembling. Sylvain could easily draw this out just for the pleasure of making a duke sweat, but the memory of Annette's soft flesh made him generous. My warehouse agent just reported receiving a new throne. It is extremely fine. Berlin has been waiting months for it. Sylvain examined his fingernails. Perhaps it can be diverted. I will write a note to my agent. You will recall that installing plumbing is a lengthy and troublesome process. Even with the pipes now in place servicing the original throne, His Majesty will find the work disruptive. Installing the first throne had been a mess. Bull and Bear had ripped into the walls and ceilings, filling the royal dressing room with the barnyard stench of their sweat. But King Louis had exercised his royal prerogative from the first moment the throne was unpacked, even before it was connected to the pipes. So it was an even trade. The king had to breathe workman's stench, and Bull and Bear had been regularly treated to the sight and scent of healthy royal bowel movements. The Grand Chamberlain steepled his fingers. Plumbing is not required, just the throne. I cannot imagine the royal household wants a second throne just for show. The Grand Chamberlain sighed. See for yourself. He led Sylvain into a cedar-scented garderobe. A rainbow of velvet and satin cushions covered the floor. The toilet gleamed in a place of honor, bracketed by marble columns. Something was growing in the toilet bowl. It looked like peach moss. The moss turned its head. 2 emerald eyes glared up at him. Manu has been offered a number of other seats, but she prefers the throne. The Grand Chamberlain looked embarrassed. Our well-beloved king will not allow her to be disturbed. In fact, he banished the courtier who first attempted to move her. The cat hissed, its tiny ivory fangs yellow against the glistening white porcelain. Sylvain stepped back. The cat's eyes narrowed with lazy menace. A wide water drop formed in the bend of the golden pipes above the toilet. The drop slid across the painted porcelain reservoir and dangled for a few heartbeats. Then it plopped onto the cat's head. Manu's eyes popped wide as saucers. Sylvain spun and fled the room, heart hammering. So Sylvain has another problem, is that everyone wants a toilet. Skipping ahead half a scene. 4. Sylvain had rarely visited the cisterns over the past 2 winters. There had been no need. The little fish was Leblanc's creature. The 2 of them had been alone for months while Sylvain fought the summer campaigns, and through the winter, Sylvain had more than enough responsibilities above ground, renovating and repairing the palace's fountains, planning and executing the water systems, and most importantly, doing it all while maintaining the illusion of a courtly gentleman of leisure, attending levees and soirees, dinners and operas. Versailles was the wonder of the world, the richest palace filled with the most cultivated courtier, each room containing a ransom of art and statuary, the gardens rivaling heaven with endless fountains. The reputation it had gained at the height of the Sun King's reign persisted, but close examination showed a palace falling apart at the seams. Sylvain had swept into Versailles and taken the waterworks for his own. He had brought the fountains back to their glory, making them play all day and all night for the pleasure of Louis the Well-Beloved, something even the Sun King couldn't have claimed. The tunnel to the cisterns branched off the cellars of the palace's old wing, part of the original foundations. It had been unbearably dank when Sylvain had first seen it a few years before. Now it was fresh and floral. A wet breeze blew in his face as though he were standing by a waterfall, the air pushed into motion by the sheer unyielding weight of falling water. The nixie's mossy nest crouched in the center of a wide stone pool. The rusted old pumps sprayed a fine mist overhead. The water in the pool pulsed, rising and falling with the cadence of breath. She was draped over the edge of the nest. Thin legs half submerged in the pool, long webbed feet gently stirring the water. The little fool didn't even know enough to keep still when pretending to sleep. He skirted the edge of the pool, climbing to the highest and driest of the granite blocks. Dripping moss and ferns crusted the grotto's ceiling and walls. A million water droplets reflected the greenish glow of her skin. "You there!" he shouted, loud enough to carry over the symphony of gushes and drips. "What are you playing at?" The nixie writhed in the moss. The wet glow of her skin grew stronger, and the mist around her neck, her nest, thickened until she seemed surrounded by tiny lights. She propped herself on one scrawny elbow and dangled a hand in the pool. With her glistening skin and sleek form, she seemed as much salamander as child, but she didn't have a talent for stillness. Like a pool of water, she vibrated with every impulse. A sigh rose over the noise. It was more a burbling gush than language. The sound repeated. It was no French word, but something like the mountain patois of home. He caught the meaning after a few more repetitions. "Bored," she said. Her lips trembled. Drips rained from the ferns. "So bored." "You are a spoiled child," he said in court French. She broke into a grin, and her big milky eyes glowed at him from across the pool. He shivered. They were human eyes, almost, and in that smooth amphibian face they seemed uncanny. Dark salamander orbs would have been less disturbing. "Sing?" she said. "Sing a song?" "I will not." She draped herself backward over a pump, webbed hand to her forehead with all the panache of an opera singer. "So bored." At least she wasn't asking for LeBlanc. "Good girls who work hard are never bored." A slim jet of water shot from the pump. It hit him square in the chest. She laughed, a giddy burble. "I got you." "Don't react," Sylvain thought, as the water dripped down his legs. "Yes, you got me, but what will that get you in the end? Some good girls get presents if they try hard enough. Would you like a present?" Her brow creased as she thought it over. "Maybe," she said. Hardly the reaction he was hoping for, but good enough. "Behave yourself. No water outside of the pipes and reservoirs. Keep it flowing and I'll bring you a present just like a good girl." "Good girl," she said in French. "But what will that get you in the end?" She was a decent mimic. Her accent was good. But she was like a parrot, repeating everything she heard. "A nice present. Be a good girl." "Good girl," she repeated in French. Then she reverted back to the mountain tongue. "Sing a song?" "No, I'll see you in a few days." Sylvain turned away, relief blossoming in his breast. "LeBlanc sing a song?" she called after him. There it was. Stay calm, he thought. Animals can sense distress. Keep walking. "LeBlanc is busy," he said over his shoulder. "He wants you to be a good girl." "Behave yourself," she called as he disappeared around the corner. 5. Sylvain paced the grand gallery, eyeing the cracked ceiling above the statue of Hermes. There had been no further accidents with the pipes. He had spent the entire night checking every joint and every join, accompanied by a yawning bull. At dawn, he'd taken Bear up to the rooftops to check the reservoirs. Checking the Grand Gallery was his last task. He was shaved and primped, even though at this early hour it would be abandoned by anyone who mattered, just a few rustics and gawkers. He didn't expect to see Arnette Darlin walking among them. A troop of admiring rustics trailed behind her as she paced the gallery. She ignored them. "The Comte de Tessé says you promised him a champagne fountain," she said, drawing the feathers of her fan between her fingers. Sylvain bent deeply, pausing at the bottom of the bough to gather his wits. He barely recalled the exchange with the Comte. What had he agreed to? "I promised nothing," he said as he straightened. Annette hadn't offered her hand. She was cool and remote as any of the marble statues lining the gallery. "The idea reached Madame's ear. She sent me to drop you a hint for the king's birthday, but..." She dropped her voice and paused with dramatic effect, snapping her fan. "But I must warn you, everyone finds a champagne fountain disappointing. Flat champagne is a chore to drink. Like so many pleasures, anticipation cannot be matched by pallid reality." Was Annette truly offended, or did she want to bring him to heel? Whatever the case, he owed her attention. He had seduced her, left her gasping on her sofa, ignored her for 2 days. No gifts, no notes, no acknowledgement. This was no way to keep a woman's favor. Annette snapped her fan again as she waited for his reply. It was time to play the courtier. He stepped close so she would have to look up to meet his eyes. It would provide a nice tableau for the watching rustics. He dropped his voice low, pitching it for her ears alone. "I would hate to disappoint you, madame." A lover is always a disappointment. The frisson of expectation is the best part of any affair. Oh, I disagree. I have never known disappointment in your company, only the fulfillment of my sweet and honeyed dreams. She was not impressed. "You saw heaven in my arms, I suppose?" "I hope we both did." A hint of a dimple appeared on her cheek. "Man is mortal." "Alas," he agreed. She offered him her hand, but withdrew it after a bare moment, just long enough for the lightest brush of his lips. She glided over to a statue of Hermes and drew her finger up the curve of the statue's leg. "You're lucky I don't care for gifts and fripperies, monsieur. I detest cut flowers, and I haven't seen a jewel I care for in months." Sylvain looked up at the ceiling. A network of cracks formed around a disc of damp plaster. Annette was directly beneath it. I'll stop there. Thank you so much for coming. If anybody's dying to read, I can give you the hard copy. Sorry.
How did you get the idea for the story?
Gosh. Goodness. I have absolutely no idea. I can't remember. I think
on the throne, perhaps.
What's that?
On the throne, perhaps.
On the throne, yes. That's what I should say. On the throne. I was reading a book about Versailles, and they actually did have toilets at that time, a few toilets. Okay. So I got that at David.
Have you been to the?
I haven't been to Versailles. Actually, I find it maybe easier to write about things I haven't seen.
Interesting.
So whether it's accurate or not,
yeah.
I have to see.
Accurate or not, your descriptions would be beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it.